Hi, everyone. In this video, I will cover Chapter 9 for New Product and Services Management. So let me go ahead and pull up the slides. Okay, let me go back to the beginning here. Make sure you can see this well. Okay. And wait just a second here. Okay, that'll work. Okay, so for Chapter 9, we're covering the topic of concept testing. Now, just as a sort of rehash of what we've done before, we sort of started to plan for this all the way back in the earlier chapters when we talked about the product innovation charter. This is where we were talking about various product ideas, but we were giving it some structure and some scope to say this is really what we're aiming to do here, even without knowing what the final concepts would look like. Chapters 4 and 5, we did an in-depth study of market areas. We're generating concepts, getting initial reactions, and now we're testing the actual concepts. Okay, so it's sort of, we're getting feedback on the concepts themselves before creating prototypes and marketing. So concept testing is actually a step that's great for some products, but really isn't effective for other products. And so it does actually make sense to, in some instances, skip concept testing. And so you might skip concept testing if the primary benefit is a personal sense of aroma, food or perfume, something like that. If it focuses on new art or entertainment, if it's difficult for customers to visualize, or if people don't really know what the problems are that they have. The reason is, because think of the idea of a Ferris wheel, or one I think is even better is the first microwave. Customers might not have known that there's technology out there to rapidly reheat food. They might have not thought they had any need for something like that. When you're coming up with tests for concepts, you want to have some sort of concept statement. And this is going to give a customer an idea of what the product could be and what the uses could be. There's really two different types here: non-commercialized, which are just facts and can be in bullet points, or commercialized, that they're made to sound like they're being promoted or advertised. So actually, commercialized statements can be more realistic because when we learn about new products, we learn about them through advertising and through word of mouth. However, they do bias results because that is the point of commercial. So non-commercialized they're not advertisements, they're less realistic, but you might get more honest feedback. Now, you could also do a compromise where you're doing sort of a gentle sell, where you're selling a concept against products that are already out there. However, what you want to try to avoid doing is mixing and matching concepts that are drastically different. So if you're going to test out a concept of a new self-driving vehicle, you probably don't want to test it against the existing vehicles because, of course, the self-driving vehicle will sound more exciting. Whether or not it actually works better is a different point, but it will sound more exciting, and customers will say, oh, yes, that'd be great. I'd love to have a self-driving vehicle. Now, a commercialized concept test, it doesn't actually have to be super flashy. It really just needs to reflect what an ad could look like. So remember, it could be a TV ad, it could be an online ad, or in this case, a print ad, where you're just sort of embellishing the product, talking about, in this case, a sparkling beverage, you're highlighting the flavors, really using sort of favorable language. And then you want to follow that up with some sort of survey. We've talked about this a lot this semester, these 5-point scales, where you have, one extreme on one end, one extreme on the other end. You might ask customers, how different do they think this soft drink would be from other products? 1 is very different, 5 not very different at all. And just like I've said earlier in the semester, the goal here is that you're quantifying opinions. You're turning opinions, which are very subjective, you're turning those into numbers, and that way you can compare responses for a lot of different customers all at once. Another approach is what's called the top 2 box scores approach. So again, we're using this 5-point scale. And the idea here is that the top 2 choices are the percentage of people who are thinking they might buy the product. So the top would be, I would definitely buy. And the second would be, I would probably buy. And, as we'll cover, and I'll kind of sort of come back to this idea, there's, someone who says they will definitely buy, it's not 100%, but it's pretty high. It's like 70%, if I'm remembering my numbers correctly. And those who say they'll probably buy, you might think, okay, over 50%. So it's not quite that high, but it is about 33%. So it's giving you an idea of how many people would actually buy this product if it is available, which helps because then you can start forecasting and you can start making predictions about how many products you'll actually sell. So for financial purposes, that's really useful. You can use something called group support systems. This is where you have a software program where you have a focus group set up. All right. So maybe you have 8 to 10 people talking about different new products, and participants respond to different versions, different sizes, different effectiveness levels. The responses are averaged. They're shown on the screen. And what you get is good concepts are selected and improved upon. And then the other responses, the other versions are said, okay, that's not going to work. All right, so this is a way of sort of modernizing the focus group approach, where as opposed to just talking about the concept, you're getting some visualization of what the product could look like. All right, what do you do once you have the results? So I've talked about this a lot. You want to try to turn opinions into numbers as much as possible, because a lot of the products we talk about here, they're products, hand sanitizer, anyone can use that. All right. So you're going to sell millions of bottles of hand sanitizer. You don't want the opinions of just like 10 people. You need the opinions of thousands, if not maybe even millions of people. But when you're coming up with averages and standard deviations, it doesn't matter if you have 1 million or if you have 10 people, you can still figure it out with the same formula. So once they're quantified, you can then start to put them into some of the maps we've talked about. And so this builds on some of the perceptual maps that we've already talked about, but we're using it in slightly different ways. First, you can analyze results with what's called a benefit segmentation map. Okay. And so here you're taking survey responses. Let's say you're asking customers how important different attributes are. The X is a customer response, each individual customer. And so you can map these all out together like it's a perceptual map. And then you can see where the different segments fall, because not everyone's going to get the same response. Some want more fashion, some want more comfort. And, just like we did in class, we can switch up the different variables that we use. But regardless, it's still going to look the same. The 2x2 is going to look the same. And then we can map out where customers fall on this and start to get an idea of who these customers are. Once we have this benefit segmentation map, we can start saying, all right, we've got customer segments. Great. We can figure out which ones we want to target. And, we can say, all right, we've got performance seeker segment, we have affordable, we have pragmatic. Now we can say, all right, how do we fit in here? How does our product fit in here? Are we able to sort of meet these customers where they are? Just a second. You can also do something called a joint space map. So a joint space map takes this benefit segment map that we're talking about today, and it puts it on the same map with a perceptual map that we talked about from a few classes ago. So you can see segments 1, 2, 3. We can say, all right, those are our segments, like here, performance seekers, affordable, so forth. All right, so they're mapped out 1, 2, 3. And then we can compare and contrast them with the brands that are existing. So remember, a perceptual map takes a look at existing brands and how people feel about those brands. Whereas the benefit segment map says, here's what people want if they could create the perfect product from themselves. You map those together and you can see how close different brands are to different segments. So in this case, for example, you can say Aqualine is very close to segment 2. Sunflare is very close to segment 1. And Molokai is kind of the closest you're going to get to segment 3, although they are probably also getting to segments 1 and 2. It also sort of highlights that a brand like Splash, again, hypothetical, they're not really close to any customer group. So this is where you'd say, all right, Splash is in trouble. They need to start coming out with new products. Otherwise, they're not going to have any customers. Okay, so that's it for chapter 9. Pretty short chapter. If you do have any questions, as always, please email me and let me know. Thanks.